Welcome, everyone, and thank you for standing by. I would like to advise you that today's call is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. All participants will be in listen-only mode until the question and answer session of today's call. I would now like to turn the conference over to Tara Rabin. Thank you so much. You may begin.
Good afternoon, and welcome to today's U.S. Food and Drug Administration media briefing to review a proposal that the agency is putting forth for the redesign of the Human Foods Program and Office of Regulatory Affairs to enhance coordination, prevention, and response activities. I'm Tara Rabin with the FDA's Office of Media Affairs. In a moment, I'll turn it over to FDA Commissioner Dr. Robert Califf and Principal Deputy Commissioner Dr. Janet Woodcock to provide brief remarks. After the remarks, we will move to the question and answer portion of the call, where Dr. Califf and Dr. Woodcock will be available to answer questions. Reporters on the phone will be in listen-only mode until we open the call up for questions. As a reminder, this call is being recorded and live-streamed on the FDA's YouTube channel. With that, I will now turn the call over to FDA Commissioner Dr. Robert Califf.
Thanks, Tara, and good afternoon, everybody. After I was nominated to return to the agency last year, I received many calls from inside and outside the agency with a message that the food program at the FDA needed more attention. As the oldest comprehensive consumer protection agency, more than a century, in fact, in the country, a major part of the mission has been overseeing the safety of the U.S. food supply that millions of Americans rely on. For the infant formula situation that unfolded just as I was confirmed, we needed to stabilize the operations before instituting changes that were so clearly needed. As you'll recall, last year I asked the Reagan-Udall Foundation to conduct an independent evaluation of the FDA Human Foods Program and Dr. Stephen Solomon to do an internal evaluation of the infant formula response. Dr. Solomon's report gave us a number of operational and policy work streams, and the evaluation led by former FDA Commissioner Jane Haney for the Reagan-Udall Foundation, along with a group of exceptional evaluators with deep knowledge of the FDA, resulted in a detailed report with specific recommendations for the program as a whole that were both instructive and highly informative. Findings and recommendations from these reviews identified issues that need to be addressed, including culture, structure, resources, and authorities. They also noted several areas of need, including modernizing data and analytical systems, providing more resources and authorities, improving both our strategies and tactics for prevention, and tuning up our emergency response systems, in addition to building a more robust regulatory training program. These reviews and recommendations were carefully considered and ultimately used to help inform the new proposed vision for the agency's foods program, which I'm excited to unveil for you today. The proposed vision is designed in a way that I believe will fundamentally transform the way the FDA oversees the U.S. food supply. It addresses the recommendations outlined in both reports and takes into consideration feedback from stakeholders as well as voices of employees, and it's consistent with the realization so well documented in the Food Safety Modernization Act passed by Congress after enormous work by the entire food community. And it's consistent with the new era of smarter food safety, the FDA's high-level strategy document. As you've no doubt seen by now, we're proposing the creation of a unified, newly envisioned organization called the Human Foods Program that elevates key focus areas, removes redundancies, and consolidates activities under a single leader, a Deputy Commissioner for Human Foods, identified through a national search, who will have a clear decision-making authority and oversight of priorities to ensure a safe and nutritious U.S. food supply. Creating a human foods program under a single leader who reports directly to the commissioner unifies and elevates the program while removing redundancies, enabling the agency to oversee human food in a more effective and efficient way. This vision also calls for a transformation of the FDA's Office of Regulatory Affairs operating structure into an enterprise-wide organization that supports the Human Foods Program and all other FDA regulatory product programs by focusing on its critical activities with full support for improved enterprise-wide information technology enhance collaboration with states, and streamline communications and decision-making. This shift would allow us to fully realize the preventive vision laid out in the Food Safety Modernization Act, elevate the importance of nutrition given declining life expectancy in the U.S., due in large part to chronic diseases with a basis in nutrition, strengthen state partnerships that are essential to regulate the over 600,000 individual entities involved in our complex food system, and embrace innovative food and agricultural technologies that will allow us to supply the nation and the globe with ample, safe, and nutritious food in the decades ahead. As I look at the 10-year horizon, I see threats from climate change, supply chain disruption, and international strife. All these factors threaten our ability to provide Americans with safe, plentiful, and nutritious food. But we have an amazing set of opportunities due to the dramatically improved methods of food production, digitization of supply chains, and amazing new biotechnology innovation. I look forward to realizing this vision as I believe it will enable us to help our food system overcome the challenges and realize the opportunities. I'm excited about the promise of the future of the Human Foods Program and the Office of Regulatory Affairs. I'm now going to hand it over to the FDA's Principal Deputy Commissioner, Dr. Janet Woodcock, to discuss the specifics of our proposal.
Well, thank you, Dr. Califf. I'd like to say that during my more than 35 years at the FDA, I've really learned just how important it is to continuously evolve our programs and adapt them to the ever-changing and complex industries we regulate, and also to the emergence of new science and technology, which often changes how we do things or what we need to focus on. And it's so important that we always strengthen collaboration with our federal and state partners. And so we've kept all this in mind as the design of this new program. And I'd like to share with you some key details of our new vision for the FDA's Human Foods Program. As mentioned by Dr. Califf, a Deputy Commissioner for Human Foods reporting directly to the Commissioner will be charged with leading the FDA's ambitious plan to ensure the foods we regulate are safe, nutritious, and of good quality, while keeping the agency on the cutting edge of the latest advancements in food science. This executive would also have a clear line of authority over the entire human foods portfolio, everything from food recalls and outbreaks to the science, to labeling, and nutrition, and everything in between. Under this plan, the functions of the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition, Office of Food Policy and Response, which are existing offices, as well as certain functions of the Office of Regulatory Affairs, will be unified in the new Human Foods Program. And under that, a new Center for Excellence in Nutrition and an Office of Integrated Food Safety System Partnerships would be formed under the proposal. A FDA Human Foods Advisory Committee will also be established to advise on challenging and emerging issues in food safety, nutrition, and innovative food technologies, and there are a lot of these to focus on. And finally, there'll be an emphasis on strengthening our enterprise information technology, our analytical capabilities, and an improvement in the workflow to accompany these other changes. This area of focus will support the Human Foods Program by enabling more efficient communications, operations, and also analytical work, including risk algorithms, to prioritize in the program and the work in the field. Now, as was already said, our plan also will propose to restructure the Office of Regulatory Affairs, which contains our field-based operations, to focus on their core areas of investigations, inspections, imports, sampling, and regulatory lab work, to allow this organization to really shine on all these capabilities. And this will be done on an enterprise-wide basis, not just the foods program. While the FDA Center for Veterinary Medicine will continue to operate as a standalone center because it does a lot of veterinary medicine activities, the proposed structure will also allow it to support the Human Foods Program, where it's animal health activities are directly relevant to human food safety. Now, we've already started taking the necessary steps to move this proposal forward. I'm spearheading an implementation and change management group that's focused on developing detailed plans to ensure the successful execution of this program. We look forward to sharing further details next month and in the future on our progress as we initiate this agency's proposals in close coordination with internal and external stakeholders while also ensuring we meet our labor obligations. So now I'd like to turn it back to the moderator to begin questions and answers.
Thank you, Dr. Woodcock. At this time, we'll begin the question and answer portion of the briefing. As a reminder, this call is being recorded. When asking a question, please state your name and media affiliation. Also, please ensure questions pertain to today's announcement and limit yourself to one question and one follow-up so we can get to as many questions as possible. With that, operator, we'll take our first question.
Thank you. If you would like to ask a question at this time, please press star 1 on your phone and be sure your line is unmuted. Again, that's star 1 for any questions. Our first question today will come from Malcolm Spicer with Sightline Insight. Go ahead, please. Your line is open.
Thank you very much. Dr. Califf, you mentioned, of course, that when you returned to the agency as commissioner, you had questions about updating the food programs and that the unfortunate infant formula situation was emerging at that time. In addition to the infant formula crisis, what other reasons were impetus for this change today?
Thanks for the question. I think if you look at both the Solomon report about the internal functioning during the infant formula situation and you look at the Reagan-Udall report, you'll see ample documentation of issues that needed to be addressed and improved in the human foods program. And, you know, a lot of it, I'd say almost none of it has to do with the people. We got really hardworking, good people who have basically kept the food supply safe compared to any other country, and our knowledge of nutrition has advanced greatly due to the work. But the organization was impeding the work that needed to be done, you know, with things ranging from the way complaints are brought into the system, not having an information technology system that handled it well, to this redundant structure, which we're now fixing, where we had a deputy commissioner with a group working in the commissioner's office and then a group, CIFSAN, working in its center, and then another group, ORA, and we're bringing those together into a unified program. So there, you know, in any complex organization, there are always a lot of issues, but it had reached the point where something needed to be done.
Sir, if I could ask one more question, and of course I have plenty, but how are the agency's regulation and oversight of the dietary supplement market and the cosmetic product markets going to be affected by this change today?
Well, we're really working on that now, and we don't have anything new to say today, but you're well aware, I think, probably based on your question, that we got new authorities on cosmetics, which we had sought for a long time to help that industry produce the highest quality product. And so now we have to figure out exactly where in the system it will fit. I still love Dr. Woodcock's quote from one of the discussions we were having yesterday. I think 100% of people do agree that cosmetics are not food. And so we need to find the right home, and we're working on it under the guidance of our new Chief Science Officer, Dr. Bumpus, who just joined us from Hopkins. Dietary supplements is a whole different kettle of fish that we can discuss at a later time, but I assure you we'll be working on that. Dr. Woodcock, you may have a comment on this.
No, I think that those are all the case. We are paying attention to it. It wasn't in the scope of what we asked Reagan-Udall to do, because obviously that was a very broad scope, but it isn't that we do not consider these issues. We do.
All right. Thank you, Malcolm. Operator, we'll take the next question.
Our next question comes from Christina Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. Go ahead, please. Your line is open.
Thank you. Could you give a little more detail about how many or what percentage of the actual field inspectors will be a part of the new food center? Is it just the people in the integrated food safety system partnerships, or will there be some of the boots on the ground inspectors who fall under the purview of the new deputy commissioner?
Well, you go right to the core of one of the most complicated things to describe completely. But the inspectors who are out in the field, of course, have a lot of activities in common across ORA, like how do they get from one place to another, where do they stay. On our imports, it doesn't matter whether it's a food or a drug or a device coming in. It all comes in through the same system with our folks who have to be there. So they'll remain, the inspectors, the investigators, as they're now called, who do the inspections, will remain in ORA. But the priorities and budget setting will be in the purview of the Deputy Commissioner for Human Foods for the activities that are human foods related. We currently have a work group to work through the specific operations because I think we all agree we want to bring these groups together, that is, the subject matter experts in the human foods program and the inspectors who are out in the investigators who are out in the field. Dr. Woodcock, would you like to add to that since you're doing a lot of work on this now?
Yeah, and this will be uniform change that we're envisioning. Obviously, we can't talk about particular units or people, right, in this setting. We have to, meet all of our labor obligations, but we consider that the changes we're going to make are across all the programs. So the similar changes for the device program, the drugs program, and so forth.
Thank you, Christina. And
sorry, could I just follow up? So the inspectors largely remain under ORA, but the budget and priority setting for them is with the deputy commissioner. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. And, but just one more sentence on that. No matter how we configure it, there needs to be collaboration in these entities, but we want to make sure that the priorities of the human foods program are met in this effort, and that necessarily means that those priorities need to be set by the human foods program.
Okay, thank you. We'll take the next question, operator.
Our next is Lee Hill with Politico. Go ahead, please. Your line is open.
Hi there. I'm wondering if any of these the proposed plans and restructuring include the reassignment or firing of anyone who was involved in the FDA breakdowns around infant formula. And if not, I'm just wondering if we should expect in the coming months anyone to be either reassigned or fired.
Yeah, I'm surprised by the way that question was asked, but I guess you have the right to ask it. We're in the reconfiguration that we're doing, no one's going to lose a job because there's a lot more work to do than the number of people that we have. We've already made changes in leadership, as you know, as things evolve in a program. But the short answer is no one's going to be reassigned or fired because of the infant formula situation. And Janet, I don't know if you have a comment on that.
Yeah,
either.
that we issued a complete report on that, and that was a systems problem, not an individual problem. And so the systems fixes that we are putting in place, both the information technology support as well as many of the changes, will address all the different issues from consumer complaints. We do not have right now a front end, right, for consumers a single front end to come through. We are addressing that and so forth all down the line. So, but I wouldn't, we're not considering, after we looked into that carefully, an individual failure. This was a failure of the systems that we had to the extent there was a failure, to, provide the information to the right people at the right time.
Yeah, I would just one last comment on this. Where there could have been better performance, that's reflected in the performance evaluation system that's in play, and of course that's confidential information between supervisors and employees.
All right, thank you, Meredith. Operator, we'll take the next question.
Our next question comes from Jackie Fatka with AgriPulse. Go ahead, please. Your line is open.
Thank you for taking questions. Your proposal does include the deputy commissioner role. However, there are some stakeholders who said that it still falls short of that fully empowered position. What is your response to those concerns that it doesn't provide that direct line authority over all the major food programs?
Well, I mean, my first response is show me a regulated entity that's totally happy with the decisions that regulators make, and I'd love to see it. I think we've made really seriously considered all the input that we've gotten. The complexity of an organization like the FDA demands that we really think carefully about how entities relate to each other and where there's joint responsibility, how that's handled. And I think relatively simple views of the complexity of this organization can lead to configurations that don't get the work done that needs to get done. I think a good example is the Center for Veterinary Medicine, where people have said that should be brought into this human foods program. But the majority of Center for Veterinary Medicine work is animal drugs and devices, which are more like the Center for Drugs and the Center for Devices on the human side. I wouldn't want the Deputy Commissioner for Foods to be making decisions about therapeutic antibodies for cats or devices in animals. So that doesn't mean the Center for Veterinary Medicine doesn't have responsibilities to the human foods program, and much like I described with ORA, when it deals with human food, the Deputy Commissioner for Foods will have primary responsibility for resources and priorities.
As a quick follow-up, you have a national search that you said you've begun. Are there certain characteristics you'll be looking for in a candidate to serve in that deputy commissioner role?
Well, I noticed that one press article quoted me as saying what I did say, which is that we are looking for a barking cat here. We're looking for an unusual person who can really deal with the complexity of the foods enterprise, spanning all the way from human nutrition to infant formula, all the way out to bacterial safety on the farm and everything in between. This person is also going to need to be a leader because change is hard in any circumstance, and we have a lot of great people, but there'll be a lot of work to make the changes. And this person will have to have a feel for the operational issues that are involved. But I can already tell you, as you might imagine, I've been talking with a lot of people over the last 3 months, and there are highly qualified people who would be interested in the job. And if you know of anybody, let us know. The jobs will be open very shortly, including other executive jobs in this system.
All right, thank you, Jackie. And operator, we'll take the next question.
Our next question is from Janelle Alicia with the AP. Go ahead, please. Your line is open.
Hi there. Thanks so much for taking the question. I just wanted to touch on that issue of the priority and budget setting residing with the new deputy commissioner. That is a concern for stakeholders who say that without the direct line authority over ORA, it kind of cements the siloed problems with ORA. So how will you guarantee that the priorities of the commissioner are transmitted over ORA in this new structure. I don't think that that folks are understanding how that's going to occur, and they're worried that it just doesn't allow the changes that you say are so important.
Well, thanks for the question. And this is an area which I think is a very important issue that is complicated and not simple. And so, obviously the Human Foods program will have a set of priorities. There'll be a budget allocated to it. Decisions need to be made about not just who the inspectors are and where they go, but how the surveillance system works as we move to a much more data-driven, algorithm-driven risk management system where inspectors go where inspections are done depends on where the highest risks are, and the trends are showing that this activity is needed. That of necessity has to be a joint activity because there are many logistics involved in that. There are, as I say, over 600,000 entities that we need to deal with and a limited number of investigators. Now, but let's say that there's some catastrophic event that occurs in a plant that's making a drug, and the number of investigators are needed for that. There's always going to need to be some back and forth that occurs to get the prioritization right, and to make modifications as needed across the spectrum of all the things the FDA needs to do. And so in any sort of matrix like this, it's very dependent on who the leaders are and how they interact. But there will also be a written agreement about how the priorities are set that will be an important part of this. And Dr. Woodcock may want to say more about this because we do have a group of young leaders from across the organization who are working on the details of how this will be done.
Certainly. Well, in modern organizations, you just don't have a big pyramid and there's the king on top and they are in charge of everything because basically what we're talking about here is decision rights, like who gets to decide on the apportionment of the budget, who gets to decide on the strategy, who gets to decide on difficult policy issues, right, that rise to the top. And those are the kind of things that we will instantiate in decision things called, we call it a concept of operations or an SOP or whatever, but it'll be very clear who's in charge of those things, who gets to decide on what the foods program budget is put forward, what that budget looks like, and so forth. So, you do not have to have a person sitting on a giant pile of people to make this work. In fact, you just have to be clear on who has what we call who has the decision rights, and that will be made very clear.
Okay, if I could just follow up. So that's going to be clear internally. There's some concern that ORA has resisted similar approaches in the past, and that they would resist this change again unless there were something more than a written understanding. Can you address that concern?
I think to go to a monolithic system that doesn't take into account the complexity of the organization because there's been resistance in the past would be a big mistake. And we have to take into account this complexity, and because there's been resistance in the past doesn't mean that it can't work. The world is changing. The FDA is changing. This is going to be made abundantly clear as we work through it. And keep in mind that we have a workforce which is currently doing a lot of work, and we're going to need to make this change in the midst of all this work being done. So it's got to be done in a way which brings people on board and leads to this more effective teamwork within the organization.
All right.
Yeah, we expect and have found that the leadership of ORA is on board. So we're not going to litigate the battles of the past. We're looking forward to a modern organization that can function, very effectively.
Great. Thank you. Operator, we'll take the next question.
Our next question comes from Danny Al-Farouk with Regulatory Focus. Go ahead, please. Your line is open.
Thanks, Dr. Califf and Dr. Woodcock. I was wondering, in your presentation, you talked about improving risk priorities and public health impact of the FDA field activities. You've got a new model for ORA, and you're creating efficiencies. How does all this affect the other work that the ORA does in terms of regulating drugs, devices, and what kind of efficiencies are you talking about? Are you planning on adding more workforce to handle the extra workload? Could you just provide some details on what all that means?
Perhaps, Rob, I could step in.
Yeah, that'd be great. Please.
Yeah, okay. Well, efficiencies. For example, and we're going to do these changes across the board, not just with the foods program vis-a-vis ORA. The particular difference for ORA and foods is in the state, partnership area. But as far as inspections and investigations and so on, this will be across the board with all the programs. For the last year, for example, we're building a workflow management system that will join the centers for the first time in ORA, so that they'll be ordering inspections, carrying out the inspections, and then eventually dealing with the back end of the inspections, potential compliance actions and so forth, on the same platform. Right now, they're siloed. And so there's like 11 different ways that centers can order inspections to ORA through SharePoint or emails and so forth, Excel spreadsheets. So we are modernizing that infrastructure. And at the same time, then we will change the business rules about how that all works, how the planning for inspection goes, how the compliance function, is carried out. But it'll be brought together by IT that join all those programs. So that's one example. We're also building a centralized inventory of all establishments, pulling together all the different inventories that reside all over the agency and making a single source of truth with, here's a facility, it makes these products owned by this company, which has these other, establishments and so on. So we're trying to build a modern system that will bring everyone together. So that's just one example. But yes, it will go across all the different programs. So the ORA is dealing with a unified system of interaction with its sort of customers.
In terms of follow-up, it still kind of to me sounds like you're going to need more resources to do all of that, at least initially. Can you talk about how you're going to get those resources? Are you going to hire more staff? Are you going to, and where are you looking for the funding for that kind of stuff, if that is the case?
We have to work within the resources we have been appropriated or that might be available under various user fee programs, and that's what we will do. This will slow down the transformation because devising the new business rules and business processes, particularly for inspections, is challenging, and instantiating them into an IT program, for example, it can be run on a tablet and so forth. But we're doing all that, and it could be accelerated should we have more resources, but we have to work within our current resources.
Thank you.
Well, Danny, I would just pile on and agree that you're pointing out an important issue, but we are limited by the money we have. I've had the advantage of leading and being an executive in some pretty successful organizations that dealt with all this complexity, but usually when you make a transformation this major, you have additional resources brought in for a period of time. But we've thought a lot about this, and I want to stress that both Dr. Woodcock and I have been out in the field and meeting with people at the working level, and there's a lot of excitement and receptivity about this across the agency. And I think there's a lot to be gained by better enterprise-wide information technology, which is a big focus, to make it so that people's work is more efficient. They'll enjoy it more. They'll also be better at what they do. So you raise a good point, but we're going to do it with what we have because that's the way it works.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Danny. Operator, we'll take the next question.
Our next question comes from Sasha Koznick with ABC News. Go ahead, please. Your line is open.
Hey, guys. Thanks so much for taking my question. It's a two-parter. Number one, I know I don't need to tell you guys how scary the formula shortage was for a lot of families out there. What can you tell them, mothers and fathers, families that are listening to this and hoping that they never have to worry like that again? How specifically would this redesigned vision help or have helped mitigate what you yourselves have acknowledged was a too slow response to the formula crisis and what critics have said helped contribute to how critical it got? Even with this new structure, could another shortage either of baby formula or another critical product in the country happen again, even with these changes? How vulnerable are we?
Well, I think the first thing we have to say, and I'm certainly a grandparent, is that this was a very difficult situation, and we understand for families. And then what I'd say is that we need to separate this into two tranches. Where I grew up, I was taught you need to get your own kitchen in order before you look elsewhere. And there are definitely a whole list of things that could be done better at FDA, and Dr. Woodcock has been through some of them. The reorganization is part of it, but there's much we've already done, like working on the complaint system so that when someone has a problem, it gets to the right place, and creating inventories of what we regulate. And you know, the hope, the likelihood, not just the hope, but we really believe that with the reorganization, the system of safety and inspections will be much more preemptive, which is what was intended in the initial design of the Food Safety Modernization Act. And that's really what we're doing, is realizing that vision so that we can catch these things earlier. But when you talk about supply chains and the commodities that we regulate, there's a whole other set of activities. We're focused on getting our kitchen in order. But as a country, I think everybody on this call probably knows that we do have supply chain issues which are across the board, whether they're drugs or devices or foods. Some of it related to the pandemic, but much larger issues that do need to be addressed. And we're raising that issue, but those issues are not within the purview of the FDA. Janet, you've dealt with this on the drug side in your previous jobs. You may want to comment.
Well, so I think the answer is we'll do everything we can, but this could happen again, because when you have only and this happens in drugs, and it's a terrible problem for the healthcare system. When you only have a few manufacturers, you're going to be vulnerable, right? And unless there is more a robustness to the supply, where there's a lot of plants, a lot of entities cranking out stuff. So if one goes down to a natural disaster or, a manufacturing problem or a supply chain issue, others can fill the gap. If that isn't the case, then you have a vulnerability. We'll do everything we can to make sure that doesn't happen in infant formula, but we have to recognize that that is potential.
Okay, thank you, Sasha. Operator, will take the final question.
And our last question comes from Celine Castronova with Blueburn Law. Go ahead, please. Your line is open.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. I'm just wondering, with Frank Giannis leaving his role as Deputy Commissioner of Food Policy and Response on February 24th, what could you share with us now on how his current responsibilities will be handled after his departure, and how will that fit into the planned redesign of the Human Foods Program? Thank you.
Well, of course, we'll miss Frank. He was certainly an expert in how the foods industry works, but it's also the case that as we are making these changes, we're really going to consolidate these functions, and we're going to recruit a new leader who will be in charge. In the interim, I'll be directly responsible for the efforts in the Commissioner's office related to the human foods program. So I think we've got it covered, and as we implement the changes as we go through this, the areas of the workforce that were in the Commissioner's office will now be blended in with CIFSAN to create this unified human foods program. I do. I know this is the last question, so I do want to just voice. I was disappointed no one asked about nutrition. It's such an important part of what the FDA does, and I just want to make that point that I hope there will be a lot more attention paid to it in a country where we're seeing this dramatic decline in life expectancy, much of it rooted in chronic disease that has a large part of its basis in nutrition. So very important point, and I'm just sorry we didn't get questions in that regard.
Thank you, Dr. Califf, and this concludes today's media briefing. A replay will be available on the FDA's YouTube page, and the FDA's statement has been posted on the agency's website. If you have follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to contact the FDA's press office at fdaoma@fda.hhs.gov. Thank you and goodbye.